It's spooky season here at Heart Starts Pounding, and today we're talking about one of the most haunted houses with the darkest histories in America. One where a cursed family lived, and it's said that their spirits still haunt the halls. If you have a dark curiosity, make sure you like this video, subscribe to this channel, and hit that notification bell so you never miss a video of my dark creation. It's when your heart starts pounding. One morning, a woman named Rebecca woke up so early it was still dark outside. She blinked the sleepiness out of her eyes and looked around, but all she could make out were the shapes of the bedroom furniture. That weekend, she was staying with her sister and nephew in the Lemp Mansion, a Victorian mansion in St. Louis, Missouri. Now, normally, waking up in a hotel in the middle of the night is not that scary, but Rebecca had heard some unsettling stories about this place. Before she left for the weekend, a friend of hers told her that the house was haunted by the ghosts of the family who originally owned it, the Lemps. Supposedly, the family had been cursed, and legend has it that curse is now trapped in the walls of the mansion, as are their souls. And the room was pretty creepy. Rebecca had to agree. The furniture was all antique, made of bulky dark wood. A massive mirror hung over a fireplace, and the curtains covering the floor-to-ceiling windows gently swayed by themselves from a draft. It was as if the room was sealed off in the late 1800s and just cracked open for Rebecca and her family to stay there. Everything looked original to the home. They were staying in the Lavender Suite, which used to be the bedroom of the matriarch of the family, Lillian Lemp, at the turn of the 20th century. It was called the Lavender Suite because Lillian had ordered everything in the room to be purple. The place, though, felt eerie and cold. And in the middle of the night, while her sister and nephew slept, Rebecca tossed and turned in Lillian Lemp's four-post bed. She covered her head with a blanket to try and force herself back to sleep. When all of a sudden, as she was half awake, Rebecca felt something press down slowly on her feet, like something was sitting on the edge of the bed. For a second, she thought that she might still be dreaming. But then, she felt something, or someone, slam into her legs, as if she was being kicked. She shot up in the darkness and looked out into the room. But nothing was there. The room was completely empty. She buried her head back under the covers. "Go to sleep, go to sleep, go to sleep," she repeated to herself. There was still the same pressure on her feet, though. But maybe she was just going crazy. Maybe she heard too many scary stories about this place. But the pressure started to feel like fluttering little kicks, almost like that of a child. This time, when she looked up over the covers, she could see little imprints down by her feet, as if someone small had been standing there on the silk comforter. In that moment, Rebecca joined the long list of people who have experienced something supernatural inside the Lemp Mansion. Today, I want to walk you through the horrible and tragic story of the Lemp family, but I also want to walk you through some of the hauntings that still torment guests to this day. And as always, listener discretion is advised. This is Heart Starts Pounding, a podcast of horrors, hauntings, and mysteries. I'm your host, Kaylin Moore. Last week, I talked to you about the most extreme haunted house attraction in the world, one that's run by a complete madman. Well, keeping with our Halloween theme of thrills and chills, today I want to tell you about one of the scariest haunted houses in the world, period. There's no one pulling the strings behind this haunted house. No, all of the scares come from the cursed family who once inhabited it. We're going to dive in just a moment, but first, if you are new here, welcome to our darkly curious community. If you're a true crime lover, a spooky paranormal lover, someone who enjoys dark history, or all of the above, like myself, then you have found a home. A creepy, creaking Victorian-era home on the edge of the woods. So make yourself comfortable and let's get started. If you were to stay at the Lemp Mansion today, you would find a freshly painted inn with 33 rooms, each decorated like how they would have been when the house was built. The mansion is currently owned by the Pointer family, who bought it in 1973 and turned it into a hotel. Ever since, Richard Pointer has invited thousands of guests like Rebecca to spend the night in the priceless piece of Missouri history. Richard kept the mansion in the condition that he bought it, but in 2010, he decided to do some major renovations. And Richard had always heard about the mansion's spooky past, but he never really believed it. In the almost 40 years he owned it, he hadn't personally experienced anything. But once he started renovating, he realized that maybe there really was something residing in the home with him. See, during the construction, he moved into the bedroom of Charles Lemp, the business-minded grandson of the original builder. One night, Richard was in the antique bed, trying to forget someone had died in that room. He was winding down with a book when a few loud blows rattled the doorframe. One after another. Someone must have broken into the house, and now they were trying to kick down the door. Richard jumped up to confront the intruder, but when he swung the door open, no one was there. Rushing through the house, he found that every single door and window was locked. There was zero evidence of a break-in. So the intruder had to be someone who was already inside, right? Richard knew for a fact that the last Lemp died in the mansion in 1949. But now, he was convinced they had never left. But to really understand the hauntings of the Lemp Mansion, we need to know the story of the Lemp family and the curse that supposedly killed them. The Lemp Mansion was built in 1866 at 322 Demonell Place, and William Lemp and his wife Julia moved in quickly afterwards. William was heir to a beer fortune. His father had founded Lemp Brewing Company, and with the money that he inherited, William bought the home of his dreams. There was a grand spiral staircase, a 2-floor glass atrium full of plants and animals, and an open-air elevator, which was a newer invention at the time. The home also sat above these massive underground caves, so he built a ballroom, a swimming pool, and an auditorium you could only access through a secret tunnel down there. He declared to the world that the home was part of what would be a long line of successful Lemps, with a slab of sandstone carved with the name Lemp that still sits outside of the house to this day. And while anyone passing the mansion back in 1866 would have thought the person inside had it all, William was struggling with the loss of his father, who had died 4 years prior. And actually, when he passed away, that was the second time that William lost his dad. See, in 1838, William's father, Johann Adam Lemp, settled into a new life in St. Louis, Missouri. Lemp had made the brave decision to emigrate from a small town in Germany with hopes that he could eventually earn enough money for his family to come join him in America. He wanted to give them a better life. At least, that's the story from the history books. If you were to ask his wife, William's mother, Justina, she would probably tell you that her husband skipped town to escape his mounting debt. Justina was Johann's second wife, and when he left her and their son, William, she was furious. She actually wrote a public ad on October 30th, 1841, describing the situation. She wrote, "I urge my husband, brewer Johann Adam Lemp, who fled from here in 1836, to return to me at once to resume his marital duties." Johann had already kind of done this before. Before Justina, he had divorced Anna Claremont, the mother of his first child, Juanette, and he didn't really look back. Whatever Johann was running from, debts, family responsibility, it was clear that he saw opportunity in America. He joined a growing group of German immigrants flocking to the United States in search of the already fabled American dream. Once he got there, he dropped his first name and started going by the more American-sounding Adam. And then he opened up a small grocery store. Adam was not really a good father, William could acknowledge, but he was fantastic at brewing vinegar. So much so that he became known in the area for it, and his grocery store exploded in popularity, soon becoming a chain and making Adam a small fortune. This American dream everyone spoke of, it turned out to be real, at least for Adam. But brewing vinegar wasn't his true passion. No, that was actually brewing beer. He was able to use his store's success to continue brewing beer on the side, under the name the Western Brewing Company. St. Louis was already a beer town, and Lemp's German-style drinkable lagers made the Western Brewing Company an instant hit. He was able to take advantage of the existing underground caves in St. Louis to store beer barrels as the operation expanded. And by 1840, he closed his grocery store chain entirely. He was a beer man now. He renamed his company the Lemp Brewing Company, and by 1858, Lemp was officially credited as the most substantial brewer in the city. And what's the first thing that the most substantial brewer does? He divorces his wife. Yes, if you thought Adam was really going to pay for Justina to come be with him in America, you would be mistaken. However, he did send her $100 as consolation, and Justina sent their son, 12-year-old William, to go be his dad's problem. William ended up joining his father in his successful business and went on to marry a wealthy woman, Julia Fikert. But not long after their wedding, William's father got sick. It turns out, drinking copious amounts of beer was not doing him any favors, and in 1862, he died of cirrhosis of the liver, a direct result of his drinking. William's father had what was described as one of the most expensive funerals St. Louis had ever seen. Carriages surrounded the graveyard, white silk gloves were gifted to every mourner who attended, and Adam Lemp's $75 coffin, which was a lot at the time, lowered into the Bellefontaine Cemetery grounds. The plot was marked by a granite tomb that just read, Adam Lemp. Even in death, he refused to acknowledge his past as Johann, the boy from Germany. And just like his father, William also intended to move forward in his life without looking back. So William and Julia didn't really waste any time growing their family to fill up all of the space of the Lemp Mansion. They had their first 6 children in a span of just 10 years. Anna, who was a world traveler, William Jr., who was his father's first successor, Louis, a lover of horses, yes, that's the only information I could find on him, Charles, a banker and politician, Frederick, who was named after William's best friend, Frederick Pabst, and Hilda, who would go on to marry into that very same Pabst family. If you've ever enjoyed a $2 PBR, you actually have the Pabst to thank. In 1880 and 1883, they had 2 more heirs, Edwin and Elsa. They would both become darlings of the St. Louis high society scene. And once again, you may look at their growing family and see a picture-perfect American dream. But as their family grew, the Lemps were potentially harboring a dark secret. Talk in St. Louis said that as the Lemp children grew up, one of them had a child. But a child who didn't fit in with the image they were trying to present to the world. Not knowing what else to do with him, they kept him in the attic. His name was Zeke, and he was believed to be the illegitimate result of one of William Jr.'s affairs. William Jr. was originally married to Lillian Handlin, and Lillian was known for her love of the color lavender. She wore it everywhere, and she designed an entire room in the Lemp Mansion to be totally purple. That's where Rebecca was staying in the first story. But it was a well-known fact that her gun-toting playboy husband, William Jr., did not stay faithful. And Zeke was rumored to be a result of that. Either way, Zeke became referred to as the forgotten Lemp child. Neighbors said that they could see the face of a forlorn boy they didn't recognize playing in the window of the attic overlooking the front yard up until the 1940s. It's also believed that Zeke had Down syndrome. The family supposedly referred to him as Zeke the monkey-faced boy. To this day, people have said they've caught glimpses of a little boy in the attic as they've walked past the house. William Sr.'s son, Frederick, also had a child in August of 1900, and though this child was born after Zeke, he was celebrated as being the first male heir to the family. Though the next year, Frederick died unexpectedly of heart failure at just 28 years old. And this, understandably, sent William Sr. into a total tailspin. Frederick had been his favorite child, and William Sr. wasn't really shy about letting people know that. He was set to take over the Lemp family brewing business. And I'll also add here that Frederick wasn't the first to die in the house. William Sr.'s in-laws, Julia's parents, were living in the Lemp Mansion until they died in their upstairs bedrooms in the 1890s. This was a tragic, tragic time in the Lemp family history, but no one in the family thought that this was just the beginning of a long, morbid pattern for the Lemps. After a short break. Frederick's death was hard on all of the Lemps, but it hit his father, William Sr., especially hard. William Sr. probably wanted to hold his family together, but the truth is he could hardly hold himself together. He had been described as despondent and nervous for months in the winter of 1904. And then when things couldn't seem lower than they were, his best friend, Frederick Pabst, also died, the one that his son was named after. Around 10 o'clock on the morning before Valentine's Day, William Sr. sat in the dining room for a light breakfast. After eating, he told his house staff that he wasn't feeling very well and he needed to lie down. William had been suffering from stomach issues for over 12 years at that point, maybe a result of all the drinking he had to do for his work, so his staff didn't really think anything of it. He'd been advised he should no longer consume alcohol anymore, which wasn't really an easy task for a man running the most popular beer hall in town. After breakfast, William spent some time alone in his bedroom upstairs. No one knew that he was getting his final affairs in order. In fact, none of the other members of his family were even home. At 10:30 a.m., a young servant girl named Eva Wetzel heard a muffled bang from the upper level. She ran up the stairs to check on her boss, but found that the door to his room was strangely locked shut. She called out, "Mr. Lemp?" and became even more worried when he didn't answer. Her first phone call was to the Lemp Brewing Company's vice president, Henry Valkamp, to tell him that something horrible had happened. Then she quickly dialed Lemp's sons, William Jr. and Edwin, and she nervously waited until they arrived. The boys ended up breaking down their father's bedroom door, and what they saw once it opened stopped them in their tracks. William Lemp Sr. had shot himself with a .38 Smith & Wesson through the right side of his head. His wife, Julia, stumbled into the awful scene just in time to see her husband take his final breaths. It was horrible. William Sr.'s death ushered in a couple really rough years for the Lemp family. It seemed like he actually was the glue holding together his children, who had never known a life other than being rich and not having to work very hard. I mean, literally became like the show Succession, with the spoiled children trying to figure out how to function. Over $400,000 of unpaid debts from improperly sold stock all of a sudden became William Jr. and his brother Charles's mess to clean up. Then, the children's mother, Julia, passed away from cancer just 2 years after their father had died. Then, in the midst of all of that, William Jr. divorced the Lavender Lady by telling the court of her supposed compulsive spending and excessive drinking. She retorted by exposing plenty of her husband's dirty laundry, like how he hosted illegal animal fights in the beer caves, not to mention the open secret of his adultery. Even by today's standards, this would be considered a very messy divorce. But the fact that St. Louis was a small town and the Lemps were practically royalty, you can imagine how much the gossip mill made of William Jr.'s legal battles. In the end, Lillian ended up winning custody of their only child, William Lemp III. The other Lemp siblings didn't really have it much easier at this time, like Elsa Lemp, for instance, who had been suffering from spells of depression ever since she had a stillborn daughter named Patricia in 1913. She self-medicated with a drugstore medicine called laudanum, which was a mixture of opium and alcohol, and was a common Victorian medicine for, quote, hysterical women. Laudanum was basically something that got you so high you just forgot about your problems. And also at the time, it was cheaper than alcohol. So, of course, it was an incredibly popular and massively abused medicine at the time. Elsa's mental state was only made worse by her rocky 9-year marriage to her husband, Thomas Wright. Thomas was the heir to the Moore metal and brass fortune, which might have been slightly more impressive if Elsa still wasn't much wealthier than him. In 1919, Elsa actually divorced her husband, but by 1920 they had reconciled and he followed her to her third home in New York. But on the night of March 19th, 1920, Elsa told her husband she wasn't feeling very well and went to draw a bath. A few moments later, he heard a gunshot. The next day, the headline just read, Mrs. Thomas H. Wright kills herself. The night before she died, Elsa had danced all night at a concert before returning home to Hortense Place. Her cook, Elizabeth Bender, was happy to see Elsa in such high spirits when Elsa stopped by her kitchen to say goodnight between 5 and 6 p.m. But by 7 o'clock, Elizabeth was really concerned. Elsa's demeanor had totally changed, and she seemed very nervous. Elsa spent the night tossing and turning from being sick to her stomach, and she woke up tired the next morning after another day of barely eating. Her husband, Thomas, asked Elsa how she was feeling, and she replied, "All right." He thought it was a good idea for Elsa to rest for another hour, and he kissed her before she went to draw a bath at 8. Elsa always kept a .32 caliber revolver in the nightstand between their tandem twin beds. Her husband would later claim he wasn't aware there was even a gun in the house. That is, until 5 minutes past 8 when he heard the shot through the door. When he ran out of the bathroom, he saw Elsa lying in bed with a bullet wound to her left breast. She was dead. But when the maids came to the kitchen to tell Elizabeth Bender what had happened, they didn't seem so sure that Elsa had shot herself. There wasn't a note left behind, and the way she was lying, tucked under the covers, almost made it look like Elsa had been sound asleep. Even weirder, the revolver was spotted on the couch, 10 feet across the room. Wright had phoned the family doctor, who confirmed Elsa was dead, and her brother Edwin rushed to be by her side. But for some reason, they all agreed to wait hours until they shared the news with the police. Once the police arrived, Thomas told the officers that he must have disturbed the scene and moved the gun, though he didn't remember doing it somehow. Elsa's end was ironically timed with the demise of her family's brewing business. Prohibition was officially declared into law on January 17, 1920, and beer brewing was done. But the Lemp Brewing Company had slowly been losing steam for years in anticipation of an industry shutdown. The company hadn't brewed a real batch of beer since 1919. William Jr. tried to get back into the game by copying competitors like Anheuser-Busch, who already popularized what was called a near beer that skirted prohibition regulations by having a really low ABV. So the Lemps tried to make a really low ABV drink called Cerva. It was 2.75% ABV, and it was terrible to drink. It was a financial failure that came too late to keep the company afloat. Not long after ceasing production on Cerva, William Jr.'s employees showed up one day to find that the doors were boarded up to the entire building. Lemp Brewing Company had apparently been shut down completely without any fanfare and without any farewell. William Jr. sold what he could for cents on the dollar, which was embarrassing to his business-minded family. And 6 months after dismantling his father's legacy, William Jr.'s behavior became erratic and self-isolating. He had also started complaining about health issues like constant headaches, and he would be found staring listlessly at the walls of his office. One day, his personal secretary, Miss Burchek, heard a loud noise that she could only assume was a worker on the basement renovation dropping an iron tool. But one of the Lemp's porters instantly recognized the gunshot and had already raced to the second floor. William Jr. was there in his office, bleeding from a .38 caliber shot to the chest, gasping for air. He had been carefully laid on the floor with his head resting on a pillow, and the gun was laying just out of reach from his right hand, smoke still exiting the chamber. When the police declared William Jr. dead, his son, William III, had kind of a surprising reaction. He just said, "I knew it. I was afraid this was coming." Though it seems impossible for one family, especially one with so much fortune, to suffer from such bad luck, the Lemp curse was continued with William III. He failed to revive the family's beer label through partnership with the Central Brewing Company. And on an otherwise perfectly lovely day in 1943, William III dropped dead from a heart attack in the middle of the street while taking a stroll. At this time, Charles, William Jr.'s brother, was becoming paranoid. He had seen what had become of his family, the untimely deaths, the suicides, and he feared that he was next on the Grim Reaper's list. He had lived in the mansion where all of this tragedy had happened, and all of that haunted him. At 77 years old, Charles was suffering from arthritis, which had recently forced him to move his second-floor bedroom to the ground floor. It had easy access to his father's old private bathroom with the Italian-imported standing shower, which was perfect for Charles' frequent showers and ice foot baths in the porcelain tub. It was believed at the time that cold water and gloves were a solid defense against infectious disease, so Charles would use both to ward off the germs he was sure were going to invade his body. He spent these quiet years alone in the mansion he'd played in as a child. His family had either moved away or had died. His only company was Zeke, who was said to be still living in the attic. Charles was a world traveler and an art collector in his youth who spent his final days holed up with books and collector's pieces from around the world while also cuddling his Doberman pinscher named Cerva after the failed beer that led to his brother's demise. The mansion represented so much for his family and himself. It was a symbol of the American dream, how a German immigrant with nothing grew one of the most successful businesses in the country. His wealth was supposed to ensure that his family was forever taken care of. And yet, Charles watched it kill family member after family member. At this time, his closest human companions were Lena and Albert Bittner, who Charles had employed for 32 years. Because they lived in the rear of the Lemp Mansion, the Bittners didn't hear much the morning of May 10th, 1949. Around 6:30 a.m., Albert placed a tray with Charles's breakfast in front of the door between his office and bedroom, just like every other day. But when Albert returned to collect the dishes around 8, he was confused to find that the food was untouched. When he went inside the bedroom, he was greeted by heartbreaking horror. Charles Lemp was the fourth of his family to use a gun to end his life. Police arrived so quickly that the light on Charles's nightstand was still burning when they got there. It flickered over a note that simply read, "In case I am found dead, blame it on no one but me." The .38 caliber bullet was eventually found buried in the down feathers of his pillows. A doctor pronounced Charles dead at 9:10 a.m. on May 10, 1949, from a self-inflicted wound to the right temple, the same spot of his father's fatal wound. Before that, Charles had actually shot his dog Serva, presumably to spare it a life without his master. He had put the dog down in the basement, but the loyal companion had dragged itself up a flight of stairs to try and die by Charles's side. Charles and Serva marked the 9th and 10th untimely demise in the Lemp family history since Adam Lemp started their dynasty 100 years earlier. The death toll, though, actually creeps hauntingly higher when you consider the numerous relatives who took their last breaths while staying in the mansion. None of the Lemps could have guessed thousands of strangers would one day live in the walls they once called home, even in their lowest moments. After Charles's unceremonious departure from the family manor, the space became a boarding house. Edwin Lemp was the last of William Sr.'s sons still standing. He renounced his claim on the property and instead focused on his charitable efforts with the St. Louis Zoo. You might say that Edwin broke the family curse by dying of natural causes at the age of 90. Meanwhile, from 1950 to 1975, travelers and locals short on cash found affordable short-term lodging in his childhood palace. And over time, some of the features that made Lemp Mansion so opulent were taken down or neglected. The invasive construction of Interstate 55 through the area stripped the grounds of some of its grandeur, but luckily, the Lemp Mansion survived as a whole and was able to be preserved. No matter how many changes the family estate has gone through, the Lemp's legacy could never be forgotten. Though, if you were to ask some of the people who stayed at Lemp Mansion over the years, it seems like certain members of the family are still there, actively making history. The Lemp Mansion ghost sightings after a short break. For decades now, Lemp Mansion guests and staff have reported an overwhelming amount of supernatural disturbances. The sounds of paws clicking on the floor, as if Serva is still there patrolling the grounds. The overwhelming smell of sweet perfume wafting over them in the middle of the night. And shockingly clear apparitions of a man with a beard and a top hat they swear bore an undeniable resemblance to William Lemp Sr. One teen girl, B, and a couple of her high school friends were staying for the weekend to celebrate her 16th birthday. B's mom was a very petite woman, like not even 5 foot tall, and she was tasked with chaperoning the group who was staying in the adjoining Frederick and Lewis suites. The first stop for the girls was the gift shop. But when they got downstairs, one of B's friends realized she had forgotten her wallet. The girls ran up to the top floor to grab it, but they couldn't seem to get their door to unlock, no matter how hard they twisted the key. B put down her camera on the hall table between the two suites to help, and eventually the girls yanked it open. Old doors, they figured. But later that night, they realized that there were new photos on the camera, ones that were taken while the camera was on the table. And as they clicked through the images that the camera had somehow taken, one of the girls gasped. B quickly zoomed in. There was no denying that a disembodied face was floating in the background, peeking out through the darkness. And then later that night, after the staff were gone for the evening, they heard a loud crash coming from the Elsa suite. They forced themselves to go check it out, but When they got to the room, it was completely empty and nothing had been broken. When they finally tried to sleep, they heard loud footsteps coming from the attic above them. There were also footsteps coming from behind a door in their bathroom, which hotel staff later told them led to the attic. Knowing rumors about a hidden child named Zeke, they all agreed that they were going to just avoid the bathroom. That night, though, Bee's friend saw someone get up and go to the bathroom. They were definitely less than 5 feet tall, so they figured it was Bee's mom. The next morning, the friend had to know if Bee's mom had seen anything in the bathroom in the middle of the night. But Bee's mom looked confused, and she said that she wouldn't have touched the bathroom with a 10-foot pole. But her friend was certain she saw someone no taller than like 4'10" go into the bathroom and close the door. Someone the height of a child. The downstairs reportedly has its fair share of ghost sightings as well. Half of a century after Zeke would have been playing in the attic, the work to restore the Lemp Mansion to its former glory began. A man named Claude was an artist who the Pointer family commissioned to repaint a mural that was on the grand parlor ceiling. But during Claude's work, he found it hard to focus, which was rare for him. He said that he constantly felt an evil presence looking up at him from below while he painted. And Claude couldn't describe how he knew this, but he said whatever was watching him was clearly trying to make it known that what he was doing was wrong. Eventually, this presence became too overwhelming and Claude left the project early. But years later, after the restoration was done, he came back to the house for a tour, and he heard a story that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. Apparently, William Lemp Sr. had once gotten into a fight with a German painter originally hired to paint the ceiling, so bad that the painter angrily vowed it would never be finished. Someone must have been preventing Claude from finishing the painting. Almost anyone who has spent time in the Lemp Mansion for a weekend has a story to tell about how someone in the family touched them from beyond the grave. But what happened to make the Lemp family so cursed during their time on Earth? Well, some have suggested that growing so much wealth in so little time was testing the graciousness of the universe. Or maybe the darkness that overtook William Sr. stemmed from a genetic predisposition that he passed down to his children. The Victorian era wasn't exactly a safe space to explore mental health. The terrible truth is that the Lemps weren't the only German immigrants suffering from violent deaths. Prohibition was really hard on American industry, including expats who pioneered a huge portion of the alcohol business. Police eventually coined the term Dutch Act to refer to the alarming number of German immigrant entrepreneurs who took their lives during the financially paralyzed era. Patrick Nolan of the Mutual Brewing Company, Otto Stiefel, who led Union Brewing, and Anheuser-Busch founder August A. Busch Sr. all died by suicide in the early 20th century. But by creating beers that became part of American society, they almost found a way to keep themselves alive forever. I guess it's fair to say every dream has a price. Johann Adam Lemp risked everything leaving Germany with nothing but his name. He wanted to forget the past and forge a new future for his family. But in the process, he sacrificed his old family. He never once thought about his first wife and child after he made his way in America. But that's the thing about the past. It always comes back to get you. And now, his family's horrible past is forever trapped within the walls of the Lemp Mansion. Heart Starts Pounding is written and produced by me, Kaylin Moore. Heart Starts Pounding is also produced by Matt Brown. Additional research and writing by Marissa Dow. Sound design and mix by Peachtree Sound. Special thanks to Travis Dunlap, Grayson Jernigan, the team at WME, and Ben Jaffe. Have a heart-pounding story or a case request? Check out heartstartspounding.com. Until next time, stay curious. Ooh.